Good morning, everyone. My name is Vanessa Bravo, and we want to welcome you to the 2026 Cannabis Growers Continuing Education Session hosted by the County Monterey Agricultural Commissioner's Office. Just for reference, this session is being recorded, so you guys all are aware of this. Once again, my name is Vanessa Bravo, Inspector Biologist with the County Monterey Agricultural Commissioner's Office, and I will be your MC for the day. Today's session has been approved by the Department of Pesticide Regulation for 2 hours of continuing education credit under the Laws and Regulations category. You must attend the entire session to receive your 2 hours of continuing education credit. At the end of the session, each participant will receive a certificate, and please remember to save it for your license renewal, as we do not keep copies of anything, and we're not responsible for that either. So if you do hold a private applicator certificate, a qualified applicator license, qualified applicator certificate, pest control advisor, or pilot license, be sure that you did sign into the front legibly so we can read your name with your license number or certificate number, so that we can ensure at the end of the session everyone's certificate is issued correctly. In the back of the room, we do have flyers, pamphlets, and additional information for any pesticide handlers, for field workers, study materials, and you're more than welcome to take a look at all of that once we have our break. Commissioner Juan Hidalgo had another commitment today, but he sends his regards. And today we will be covering important information relevant to your daily operations. As you are aware of many of the regulatory agencies you might interact with each year relating to the cannabis operations, the Agricultural Commissioner and Sealer of Weights and Measures oversees the safe and effective use of pesticides and the weighing devices at your facilities. Today's presentations will solely focus on pesticide usage and safety. It will be a lot of information, but we are more than happy to send you guys the PDF files if needed as well. Now please join me in welcoming our first presenter, Sarah Smith, who will be covering the topic on permitting process.
So good morning, everyone. My name is Sarah Smith. I'm an agricultural inspector biologist at the Monterey County Ag Commissioner's Office, specifically in the Pesticide Use Enforcement Department. And today I am going to be presenting on the permitting process. Some of the topics that I will be covering today is our office's mission, our inspection and enforcement authority, who the operator of the property is, what is a pesticide, operator identification numbers, authorized representatives, certified applicators, pesticide use reports, and any additional requirements. So before we get started, I'm going to mention our mission. So the Agricultural Commissioner's Office is dedicated to worker health and safety, the protection of environmental resources, and the promotion of the agricultural sector. So as the local pesticide use enforcement agency, our office regulates pesticide sales and use, supports integrated pest management and best practices, and we work closely with the California Department of Pesticide Regulation to enforce state laws and regulations regarding pesticide sales and use, licensing, worker safety, and pesticide use reporting. So the pesticide use enforcement, as a whole, our responsibilities include investigating reported pesticide incidents and illnesses, inspecting the operations and records of growers, pest control businesses, agricultural pest control advisors, farm labor contractors, and government agencies. We also certify private applicators and issue restricted material permits and operator identification numbers, collecting and reporting to DPR pesticide use report information, and monitoring pesticide applications in the field. So every year we conduct a multitude of inspections. These can be our field worker safety inspections, pesticide use monitoring inspections, and I'm sure as some of you experienced 2 years ago as well as this year, pest control headquarters inspections, aka our audits. This regulation, Title 3 California Code of Regulations, Section 6140, is what gives us the authority to conduct these kinds of inspections. So in summary, this regulation is what gives us the authority at any other reasonable time to enter and inspect and or sample the following in order to determine compliance. This is going to be fields, areas, structures, and greenhouses where pesticides are handled, stored, or applied, growing crops and harvested commodities, equipment, including protective clothing and equipment used to store, transport, or handle pesticides, change areas and other facilities used by employees, and pesticides and tank mixtures thereof. Another section of our inspection authority is each person responsible for preparing and maintaining records shall make those records available to the commissioner during business hours upon demand of the commissioner. The required records include records concerning work hours, training, and medical monitoring of employees, pest control recommendations and pesticide use and operation records, and pesticide transactions, sales, and delivery records. So there is another regulation that allows us to give an enforcement response to businesses or growers that are not in compliance with regulations. This is going to be Title III California Code of Regulations, Sections 6128 and 6130. Section 6128 is our enforcement response to violations. There are 3 different classes. You have a Class A, Class B, and Class C. A Class A is a violation that caused health, property, or environmental hazard. A Class B is a violation of a law or regulation that mitigates the risk of adverse health, property, or environmental effects that is not designated as a Class A. And Class C is violation of a law or regulation that does not mitigate the risk of an adverse health, property, or environmental effect. And Class C is what we consider our paperwork enforcement. Per 3 CCR Section 6130 is our civil penalty actions by commissioners. So we are able to give a fine amount depending on the severity of each class. And this was updated beginning July 1st, 2024. There were updates to the fine ranges. So as of now, a Class A fine range can be from $700 to $15,000. A Class B fine range can be $250 to $3,000, and a Class C violation can be $50 to $400. So now that I've kind of covered who we are as an office and who we are as the pesticide use enforcement, as a local pesticide use enforcement agency, I'm going to start getting into the permitting process, but there are a couple things I want to discuss before we get into the nitty-gritty details. So first thing I'm going to cover is who is the operator of the property. This is per 3 CCR Section 6000, which is the definitions, and you can find all this on DPR's website. The operator of the property means a person who owns the property and or is legally entitled to possess or use the property through terms of a lease, rental contract, trust, or other management agreement. So also same thing, before I get into what is an actual pesticide, I'm going to pull the definition from DPR's website. And for this, a pesticide means any substance or mixture of substances that is a pesticide as defined in the Food and Agricultural Code. And it also includes mixtures and dilutions of pesticides. So to kind of get into what is a pesticide, so in a summary, any pesticide or any substance is intended to control, destroy, repel, or attract pests. This can include, but is not limited to, insecticides, herbicides, fungicides, rodenticides, disinfectants, sanitizers, and household pest controlling chemicals. And if you notice in the bottom left, I've attached some examples of these pesticides in the lower left corner of the slide, which is going to be that Pyganic, Azatin, Venerate, and Grandiva. So now that we kind of know what the pesticide is, the main definition, and what it entails, in the next few slides I'm going to briefly cover a different kind of pesticide, and that is going to be the FIFRA 25B products. So FIFRA 25B products, FIFRA stands for the Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, and Rodenticide Act, and these are also covered under Title III California Code of Regulations, Sections 6147 and 40 CFR 152.25F. These pesticides are considered minimum risk pesticides because they pose little to no risk to human health or the environment. And some examples of the active ingredients that these pesticides contain are going to be like thyme oil, cinnamon oil, castor oil, and I have an example of one here, and it's going to be the mammoth label. And then if it is considered a minimum risk pesticide, it means that it does not need to be registered with the EPA, but it still needs to be registered with the state of California. So how do you know if the pesticide product you want to use is exempt under the Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, and Rodenticide Act? According to Cal EPA, in order for your product to be considered exempt from FIFRA, it must meet all 6 conditions listed in this slide and the next slide. So condition 1 is going to be the product's active ingredients must only be those that are listed in 40 CFR 152.25 F1. Condition 2 is going to be the product's inert ingredients may only be those that have been classified by EPA as what's listed in 40 CFR 152.25F2. Commonly consumed food commodities, animal feed items, and edible fats and oils as described in 40 CFR 180.95A, B, and C, and certain chemical substances listed under 40 CFR 180.950E. Condition 3 is all of the ingredients, both active and inert, must be listed on the label. The active ingredient must be listed by label display name and percentage by weight. Each inert ingredient must be listed by label display name. Condition 4 is going to be the product must not bear claims to either control or mitigate organisms that pose a threat to human health or insects or rodents carrying specific diseases. Condition 5 is going to be the name of the producer or the company for whom the product was produced, and the company's contact information must be displayed prominently on the product label. And the sixth and final condition is going to be the label cannot include any false or misleading statements. So now that we kind of know what kind of pesticides that you might be using in your guys' operations, I'm going to continue defining agricultural use. So agricultural use means the use of any pesticide, method, device for the control of plant or animal pests or any other pests, or the use of any pesticide for the regulation of plant growth or defoliation of plants. So that is going to be the definition of agricultural use. And in the next slide, I'm going to talk about cannabis as an agricultural commodity. So cannabis as an agricultural commodity. The reason why cannabis is subjected to production ag regulations and pesticide use submitting is because in 2017, DPR released a letter stating that cannabis meets the definition of an agricultural commodity and is subjected to production agricultural regulations. And these are subjected to use reporting under Title III California Code of Regulations, Section 6626. So now that we kind of know a little bit about pesticide use enforcement unit, what a pesticide is and how cannabis is considered as an agricultural commodity, let's get into what you need to be able to spray pesticides on your guys' operations. So an operator identification number. In order to possess or use pesticides, there are two types of permit that allow this. One is an operator identification number and the other is a restricted materials permit. The OIN is what is going to apply to the cannabis industry. Basically, an OIN is an identification number issued to the property operators. The County Ag Commissioners issues an OIN to the operator of the property or the operator's authorized representative in order to purchase and use pesticides for a specific period. An operator identification number is necessary to purchase pesticides and report pesticide use. Okay, so in the last slide I mentioned an authorized representative. I'm going to briefly cover what an authorized representative is. So basically what an authorized representative is it allows your authorized representative to make changes on behalf of the operating property. So if you need somebody, if you're the owner of an operation, you need somebody to run it and you need somebody to make decisions on your behalf for the permit side of things, you're going to have an authorized representative on your permit. They can come into our office and make changes to the permit after okaying with you. And this form that I have posted here in the slides is what you'll need to fill out to verify that you do work for the company you work for and it needs to be signed off by the authorized representative and by the person who owns the company, the president, etc. So an operator identification number is for the use of agricultural non-restricted use pesticides, and some common examples of these operations are going to be certified organic operations, wineries, and cannabis. So if you don't have an OIN with us and you'd like to know how to obtain an operator identification number from our office, you'll need to provide us with the following: a completed OIN application, a signed owner authorization letter if it's applicable, maps for each location on the OIN. This is going to have the company name, the company or organization name, the ranch name, block ID numbers, and acreage and square footage, and any sensitive sites nearby. And all this information can be found on our website. So I'm going to briefly talk about a private applicator certificate. What is a private applicator? A private applicator is defined as an individual who uses or supervises the use of a pesticide for the purpose of producing an agricultural commodity, as defined by Title 40 California Code of Regulation or Code of Federal Regulations, Section 171.285, and on property owned, leased, or rented by him or her, or his/her employer. So how do you obtain this? You can obtain it from our office. You're going to complete a private applicator certificate application, a letter of authorization if applicable, and a letter of authorization is basically, it looks just like the form I showed you in the authorized representative, except it's specifically for private applicators, and we just are verifying that you work for the company that you work for, and it's got to be signed by you and by your president, owner of the company, whatever it is there. So you're going to take a written exam, and then you must pass this exam with a 70% or better, and all the exams that we have are available in English and in Spanish. So around the time it comes time to renew, how do you renew these hours? You have a couple options. You can do continuing education hours, any online classes or in-person classes, or a recertification exam through our office, and the same thing is you must pass with a 70% or better. And some of these classes too, like today, are in-person classes. You can attend your local CE classes or any other class in any other county, and you can receive credits for that. But if you look at the bottom left of my slide, this is going to be this QR code. If you scan this QR code, you'll be taken to a page that looks like this. This is on DPR's website where you can help, or where it can help you look up continuing education courses nearby and see how many hours you can receive for those in order to renew your private applicator certificate. Another type of applicator that some operations can have is a commercial applicator. A commercial applicator means a person who uses or supervises the use of a pesticide for any purpose or on any property other than as provided by the definition in private applicator. Some examples of these are going to be your qualified applicator's license and qualified applicator certificate, but it does incorporate most of these as well. And commercial applicators are commonly found with the pest control businesses. So, as in my slide, one of my previous slides, cannabis is now deemed as an ag commodity. Since it is considered an agricultural commodity, all pesticide use must be reported to the Ag Commissioner's office. There are two forms and multiple ways you can report your pesticide uses to our office. First, the two forms you see in this slide are our monthly pesticide use reports. These forms were updated in December of 2024 and are the form your operations must use depending on your situation. One form, I believe it's the form on the left, is going to be just the monthly one if you have one single site, one operation, and that is what you're going to use to report any pesticide use. And the other is meant for operations where you will either have multiple sites or multiple commodities. So depending on your situation, each form is for different things. And you can submit these by dropping them off in person, or you can mail them to the Commissioner's office. And then secondly, I want to mention a different option of submitting your pesticide use reports. There is an online option where you can use CalAg permits. If you are interested in moving from submitting your pesticide use reports by paper to an electronic version, please pay close attention to my next slides, as I will be going over how to submit a pesticide use report via CalAg permits. And then please note that these reports are due by the 10th of the following month. For example, if you are reporting your March pesticide use reports, these reports are due by April 10th. And these forms can also be found on our website. So, pesticide use reports. This is going to be a quick example of how to submit through CalAg permits. The first thing you're going to do, go to calagpermits.org. You're going to enter your username and password into the box. If this is your first time logging into CalAg permits and you obtained a username and a temporary password from us, you will be prompted to change your temporary password after your first login. So once you log in, you're going to come to a screen that looks like this. What you're going to click is up here in this red box. There's going to be two different things. The one you're going to use is enter a new monthly report for grower applications. Once you click on that, you're going to be brought to a screen that looks like this. All the orange fields on this are mandatory. The green fields are optional, but we do encourage you to fill those out. So to get a closer look of that screenshot I have on the last page, first thing you're going to do when you enter your use report, you're going to select your operator ID or permit number from this box. You're going to enter your application date and time, and now these include the start application date and time and the end application date and time. So make sure that those are entered accordingly. And then you're gonna enter a document number for record keeping if that is one. Like I said, it's a green box. You don't have to enter it, but we do encourage you to enter it, or if you have an internal filing system that is based off document numbers, you can go ahead and enter that number there. And then you're also gonna enter your application method down here at the bottom below that end application date and time. So below that, you're gonna have your site identification number. Now this ID is unique to each location. So for example, as you see up here, if I'm spraying on site 1, and it's gonna be block 1 or greenhouse 1, I'm gonna put 010001. This helps, it's a good identifier for where you guys are spraying the pesticides. Then you're gonna select your commodity in the commodity treated box. And then you're going to enter your treated area and units. And it's not always in acres. For the cannabis industry, it's mostly done in square footage, so you can change it to square footage. And then you're going to enter in all your pesticide products. So you're going to start with 1, you're going to enter your product EPA number and name, the total product used, and the units associated with that. And then the other boxes, like I said, the green ones are optional, but you can choose to enter them or not. And then you're going to choose one of the save line buttons down at the bottom. So to go over the save line buttons, the first one is going to be your save line new product. After you fill in all that information, you can click save line new product. This copies the date and location, and you're just going to enter any new pesticides. If you click save line new date, it copies only the location and you enter the new date and pesticides. The save line new site and date copies just the permit name and you enter the new date, location, and pesticides. The save line done button, it saves the current pesticide data line and closes the POR for saving the draft or to submit to the county. And then clear line erases the current pesticide data being entered. At the end of the report, you're going to see the report prepared by and the date. They are optional. We encourage you to enter that as well. You can then save the POR into draft or submit it to the county. And on this slide, I have an example of what that POR will look like if you're done, or if you want to, you can hit save draft. If you have more to enter, you can hit save draft at the bottom. But if you're completely done, just go ahead and submit it to the county and it will be submitted. So in the next few slides, I'm going to briefly be covering the school site regulation. So if you look in your operator identification number that you received during our permit season, you'll see this chart here. This was updated from last year's for some new regulations that were put into effect for the school site regulations. And then you can see that pesticide applications restrictions will apply Monday through Friday during the hours of 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. depending on the distance from the treated area to a school site, the application equipment used, and the type of pesticide applied. However, these application restrictions do not apply for greenhouse applications. And also depending on what you're using, whether it's a liquid pesticide, dust, or granule, it will depend on what you use. So pesticide applications continuing on. In my previous slide, I showed the chart that has the distance restrictions depending on what type of equipment you're using and what kind of pesticide you're using. For cannabis, for greenhouse applications, there are no distance restrictions when the application is made within an enclosed space, such as the greenhouse. An application is made using a backpack sprayer. However, when this type of equipment incorporates an air blast sprayer or is used to apply a dust or powder, then the quarter-mile distance restriction in subsection A does apply. And then an application is made using a hand pump sprayer. However, also when this type of equipment is used to apply a dust, powder, or fumigant, then the quarter-mile distance restriction in subsection A applies. Despite all of the no distance restrictions, if you do have a site where you are having to submit annual notifications, you do still have to submit, even if you're not subjected to the time regulation and the distance restriction. So for all applications of pesticides expected to be made for the production of an ag commodity within a quarter mile of the school site, the operator of the property to be treated shall provide annual notification to those specified in B no later than April 30th of pesticides expected to be used from July 1st of the current year through June 30th of the next year. The annual notification must be provided to the principal of a of a public K-12 school, the administrator of a child daycare facility, and the county ag commissioner. So you can also submit these school sites via CalAg permits. So if you are interested, please reach out to us. We can help you in any way to get this all set up for you. So in this slide, I have a example, short 6-step example of how to submit through CalAg permits your school site notifications. So if you do have a site that's within that quarter mile or is subjected to any school site notifications, this will help out with how to submit those. So to summarize the permitting process, after you know what pesticides you're going to be using, the first thing you're going to do is obtain an op ID from the county and that your growing operation is in. In between getting your op ID and the application of pesticides, you're going to make sure your employees are trained, whether they are going to be a handler or a field worker or both. This is going to be mentioned in the next presentation. You are then going to make an application of pesticides and then submit your pesticide use reports. Once again, this report must be submitted by the 10th of the following month. Now, after you submit your pesticide use report, there are records that you are going to need to retain. And this information is also going to be found in a later presentation. Any questions? Thank you.
I had a question.
Yes.
The site IDs, they're probably on their way.
Yes. Yeah, it will be, the site ID is relevant to what is on the, so if you have like 01, if you have one site on your permit, it'll say 01, and that's going to be what's relevant to the site ID.
All right, thank you so much, Sarah, for that information. Up next, we do have Sergio Flores, who will be covering employee roles and responsibilities.
My name is Sergio Flores, Agricultural Inspector, Biologist here with the Monterey County Agricultural Commissioner's Office. Today I will be talking to you about employers, employee training, and safety responsibilities. So Sarah did cover the permitting process, right? Obtaining an operator identification number for you to be able to spray pesticides at your operation. Now I will be moving into when you do have employees who apply pesticides or employees who work in areas where pesticides are applied. This will be covering all the training and safety responsibilities that the employers are required to cover and provide. So these are some of the topics that I'll be covering today. We'll start off with training requirements. Once we cover the training requirements, we'll move on to personal protective equipment, PPE for pesticide handlers, those people who do apply pesticides. We'll move on to decontamination facilities, application-specific information display, hazard communication A8 and A9 leaflets, and then enclosed space ventilation criteria, and then finishing off with application exclusion zones. If you guys do have any questions during the presentation, go ahead and raise your hand. I am open to questions during the presentation. All right, so I do want to start off first with a definition of a pesticide handler, who is considered a pesticide handler here in the state of California. This definition is found in Title III of California Code of Regulations 6000. A pesticide handler is any person who does any of the following. Any person who mixes, loads, transfers, or applies pesticides or assists with the application. Any person who maintains, services, repairs, cleans, or handles equipment that may contain pesticide residues. And any person who works with opened, including emptied but not rinsed, containers of pesticides. Here in the state of California, any pesticide handler must have a minimum age of 18 years old. So if you do have any employees who conduct any of these activities for your operation, they are considered a pesticide handler. And by the regulations here in the state of California, they are required to receive annual handler training, which I'll be covering here in the next couple slides. So pesticide handler training, the requirements for this specific training is outlined in Title III CCR 6724. This training must be provided before employees handle pesticides and must be updated every 12 months after that, so annually, right? There are certain training topics that must be covered. I won't go into detail of them today, but if you are interested, they are available on Title III CCR 6724. We actually also do have training templates on the back table if you are interested. Those training templates pretty much outline every single topic that must be covered for that training. Once the training is conducted, initially it must also be updated to cover any new pesticides that will be handled. So if there's a certain new type of pesticide that the employee is going to be handled that wasn't initially covered in the initial training, that training must be updated. Here in the state of California, not just any person can provide this training. The individual, the instructor who is providing the training must have a qualification to train handlers in California, which I'll cover in this next slide. So who is actually qualified to train pesticide handlers here in the state of California? These requirements are outlined in 3 CCR 6724 Part F, and those are going to be individuals who hold a QAL or QAC, your qualified applicator license holders and qualified applicator certificate holders, which are considered or referred to as qualified applicators. In addition to that, another option is any individual who holds a private applicator certificate, which is what Sarah covered earlier in her presentation. Those individuals also have that qualification to provide that training to employees. Aside from applicators, PCAs, pest control advisors, also have that qualification to train employees on pesticides. And then there are other options like registered professional foresters here in the state of California, or individuals who complete a train the trainer T2 program that is approved by the California Department of Pesticide Regulation. These programs are basically classes that individuals attend. It's usually an all-day thing. And basically this individual who attends this class, at the end of the class, they'll have all the knowledge and requirements needed to train pesticide handlers and field workers here in the state of California. They are given a certificate to confirm that they are qualified. But as I mentioned, right, it does have to be done through a program that is approved at the state level by the California Department of Pesticide Regulation, which I'll cover here next. If you are interested in looking into these programs, Department of Pesticide Regulation does have a section on their website where you can find more information and find the actual programs that are qualified for this Train the Trainer certificate. There is a QR code there on the screen if you're interested. We also provided the website there. But basically, whenever you use this QR code or use the website, it'll take you to this page, information for employers and trainers. You would have to scroll down to the bottom portion where approved T2 program section is, and then it'll provide the list of all the programs that are approved here in the state of California. So once again, that QR code if you are interested, and as I mentioned, right, you do have to attend some sort of class to be able to obtain this certification to train. All right, so now that I did cover who is allowed to train pesticide handlers, I will be moving into pesticide handler safety, specifically regulations that involve personal protective equipment. And these are outlined in 3 CCR 6738. So employers shall provide all personal protective equipment that is required by any of the following situations. 1, the pesticide product labeling. So as you, most of you are aware, right, pesticide product labels do have a required personal protective equipment section. Any user, the label is the law, so any person who is handling that pesticide is required to abide by those requirements outlined on the pesticide label. Aside from that, the other requirement, if the label doesn't require a certain PPE, California has taken it upon themselves to actually write regulations for the protection of workers. So sometimes those PPE requirements may actually come from regulation, and that specific regulation, as you see there on the screen, is going to be 3 CCR 6738.1. Aside from that, restricted material permit conditions. If restricted material permit is granted, sometimes it can be conditioned to require pesticide handlers to use certain types of personal protective equipment. However, this third one does not apply to you guys, as there are no restricted material applications allowed on cannabis. So it would be those main first two topics that are covered there. So now moving into the actual code section, what does it require? So the regulation reads, employers shall inspect PPE equipment daily prior to use. They must also repair or replace damaged or heavily contaminated PPE, and then assure that clean PPE is stored in a clean and pesticide-free designated place. And then assure that PPE is used correctly and for its intended purpose. So as you guys can see in that picture, right, that is a pesticide storage area, just to show you guys that PPE should not be stored in an area where pesticides are also being stored. So these are some of the basic requirements regarding PPE that the employer does have to comply with here in the state of California. All right, moving into personal protective equipment use, specifically protective eyewear. So the employer shall assure that employees wear protective eyewear in the following situations. Anytime a pesticide handler is mixing, loading, applying pesticides by hand using handheld equipment or ground rig equipment, or they're exposed to application equipment that contains or is contaminated with the pesticide. So any of these situations, regulation does require that the employer provide protective eyewear to employees. The one that might be common for in your guys' operations is the third bullet point, applying pesticides by hand. If you do have pesticide handlers who use backpack sprayers, pump sprayers, that is application method that is using handheld equipment and would require employees to be wearing protective eyewear, even if the label of the pesticide product does not require it. If the label of the pesticide actually identifies a specific type of protective eyewear, that specific type must actually be worn. And then protective eyewear specifications are outlined in 3 CCR 6738.2. Which I will be covering in this next slide. So selection of protective eyewear outlined in 3 CCR 6738.2 requires that the protective eyewear that is employees use provides brow and temple protection that conforms to the curvature of the face and side protection of the eyes, right? Basically having full coverage of your eyes if there were to be any accident, any incident where there is some sort of pesticide splash, spill, or anything like that, it would prevent the pesticide from reaching that individual's eyes. Aside from that, the eyewear that is selected must also bear evidence of compliance with the standard ANSI C87.1 2010. As you guys can see there on the top right-hand corner, there is a picture of safety glasses, and it shows that imprint verifying that it does meet this standard. So all safety glasses that are used at your operation that you're providing to your employees does have to bear that evidence of that standard. And as I mentioned earlier, when labeling doesn't, when labeling doesn't identify a specific type, the following do meet the requirements. So you have a pesticide label that says, all pesticide handlers must wear protective eyewear, right? That is a general statement, broad statement. It doesn't say safety glasses, doesn't say goggles. These are the options that you have for that individual. One would be safety glasses. Another option is goggles, a face shield, or a full face respirator. So those 4 options would meet that protective eyewear requirement if the label doesn't require a specific type. Moving on to something that I do want to cover briefly. If you do have employees who wear prescription glasses and are applying pesticides, the wearing of prescription glasses must not interfere with the fit and function of the protective eyewear that the individual is using, and vice versa, right? The protective eyewear must not interfere with the fit and function of the prescription glasses that the individual wears on a day-to-day basis. So it's up to you as an employer to find some sort of PPE that would not prevent, or interfere with the fit and function of prescription glasses and vice versa. Some of the options that you have are goggles. Goggles are usually a little bit thicker, wider, right? Allows for prescription glasses to fit under those goggles. Or you do have the option of a full face or a face shield, as you see there, that third one on the bottom, that also meets that requirement and wouldn't interfere with the fit and function of the prescription glasses, and their eyes would be protected, right? So these are some of the options when you do have individuals who wear prescription glasses and will be applying pesticides. All right, so continuing on, now that I covered the protective eyewear, I do want to cover dermal protection, specifically the use of chemical-resistant gloves. So the employer does have the responsibility to assure that employees are wearing chemical-resistant gloves when, once again, doing any of the following: mixing any pesticide, loading any pesticide, applying pesticides by hand or ground rig, or they're exposed to application equipment that contains or is contaminated with the pesticide. So if your employees do any of these activities for you, they are required to be wearing chemical-resistant gloves, and you are required to provide it for them. There are also some specifications for the type of gloves that must be worn. The glove material must be at least 14 mils or thicker, with some exceptions that you can see in Title III CCR 6738.3. And then chemical-resistant glove specifications are outlined in what I just mentioned. So sometimes there are pesticide labels that do prohibit the use of chemical-resistant gloves. I don't think it's anything necessarily that is used in the cannabis industry. I have seen them, this prohibition for the use of chemical-resistant gloves on fumigant products. So keep that in mind as you go through, the types of pesticides that you will be using at your operation, and verifying what PPE is required, but also verifying what PPE is also prohibited, as sometimes it can also create some sort of safety risk, and it's the reason why it's prohibited. All right, so moving on to chemical-resistant footwear. So once again, the employer shall assure that employees wear chemical-resistant footwear when required. If the label doesn't specify a specific type, the following do meet this requirement. One option is going to be chemical-resistant shoes. The second option would be chemical-resistant boots, or chemical-resistant coverings worn over shoes or boots. As you see, I do have some examples there on the slide. And that last bullet point, chemical-resistant coverings worn over shoes and boots. You can see those boots with that yellow covering. A lot of the times people refer to them as booties, things that you hear out there in the field, but that is another option that would meet this requirement for chemical-resistant footwear. All right, so now I do want to move into when PPE is actually required by regulation, right? So earlier I mentioned sometimes pesticide labels don't necessarily require certain pieces of PPE to be worn by the pesticide handler, but here in the state of California, there are regulations that require, even if the label doesn't require it, there's certain activities or types of pesticides that are being handled, the PPE requirements apply, and this is one of them. So anytime you have an employee who handles a pesticide with the word warning or danger on it, as you can see there, that vinegar, weed, and grass killer, that outlined in red, as you can see, it's a danger product, right? So in the state of California, if you do have any employees who handle these pesticides, they actually are required to be wearing coveralls. So since vinegar, weed, and grass killer is a danger product, and let's say your pesticide handler was handling this product, it is a danger product. The label, as you can see here, does not require the use of coveralls. So this is a snippet specifically from the personal protective equipment section of the label, which states applicators and other handlers must wear appropriate protective eyewear, such as a face shield or goggles and face mask, long sleeve shirt and long pants, waterproof gloves, shoes plus socks. But as you can see right, there is no mention of the use of coveralls there. But as I mentioned earlier, since it is a warning or danger product, employees are required to wear coveralls per regulation, which would be 3 CCR 6738.1. So it's important for you guys to go look through your products, right, and identify if any danger or warning product products are going to be handled by your employees, you are required to provide coveralls for that employee and then ensure that they're actually wearing those coveralls. Moving on to respiratory protection. So when respiratory protection is required by regulation, pesticide label, or the employer policy, the following is required. Anytime you do have employees who are wearing respirators, you are required to establish a written respiratory protection program. This program basically outlines the selection of respirators, the fit test requirements, medical evaluations that must be conducted, how they will be maintained, cleaned, the training that will be provided to these employees who wear these respirators. So that's kind of what the respiratory protection program outlines for your operation. Aside from that, as I mentioned, right, before employees wear a respirator, they must be, one, medically evaluated. This medical evaluation is done at the beginning prior to them ever wearing a respirator. It only has to be completed once. However, there are certain situations that would require an individual to be medically evaluated as well. If you notice a sudden change in the health of that individual, they gain a lot of weight, they lose a lot of weight, they're having personal health problems, it would be required that they be medically evaluated for respirator use, right? And this medical evaluation is done by a licensed doctor here in the state of California, which pretty much determines whether or not that individual is allowed to wear a respirator. Aside from that medical evaluation, there are required fit tests that are required. So these are basically checks that the individual does with the certain types of respirators that they will be using, making sure that the fit and function of that respirator is not, there's no interference with that, right? And that they've selected the correct respirator that they'll be using. That fit test is done every 12 months as compared to the medical evaluation. So keep that in mind if you do have employees who wear respirators. That is one of the records that we do check when we do employee safety headquarter inspections, our audits. We verify that all your pesticide handlers have been medically evaluated and fit tested, and you guys are required to keep an actual physical record of that, right? And normally the agency, the business, the medical office that conducts these will provide those records to you once it's been completed. Aside from that, medical evaluation and the fit test, obviously there is training required on the use of respirators. You never want the respirator to be creating a health hazard as well, right? They're meant to protect the user, but if used incorrectly can also present a hazard depending on the activity that they're doing. So that is respiratory protection when it is required, one, by regulation, two, by the pesticide label, right? The pesticide label says that the applicator has to wear a respirator, or employer policy. You have decided, hey, you know what? I want all my pesticide handlers to wear a respirator regardless, even if it's not required by the pesticide label or per regulation. So I did just cover whenever use of a respirator is required. Sometimes employees do wear a respirator on a voluntary basis, right? And this is when respiratory protection is not required by regulation, the pesticide label, or the employer policy, and employees themselves still want to wear a respirator. So employees may wear a respirator on a voluntary basis if it won't create a hazard, as I mentioned earlier. The employer can provide respirators, or employees can use their own. If employees are going to be wearing respirators on a voluntary basis, you as the employer must display the voluntary respirator use posting alongside the A8 document. And I'll be covering the A8 document here briefly in the next couple slides. But this is that picture of the voluntary respirator use posting that is required to be posted to the Department of Pesticide Regulation, means actually attached to a wall or something, right, where someone can actually read it. So there are certain requirements depending on what types of respirators are being used on a voluntary basis and who is providing it, right? Are employees themselves bringing them, or is the employer themselves providing those respirators to employees? So if the employer provides elastomeric respirators, those are going to be your half-face respirators, full-face respirators that usually have that rubber face piece attached to it. They're still required to establish the respiratory protection program, and the medical evaluation and training is also required as well. Even though it's a voluntary use basis, you as the employer are still providing those respirators, and they are elastomeric. Another situation, possible situation, if you're only providing filtering face pieces, right? Those are your N95 type respirators. Then a written program, a medical evaluation, and training is not required for those. So this is if you as the employer is providing the actual respirator itself. And to kind of summarize, I know it's a lot of information, can be a little bit confusing, right? This is a good chart that does summarize the required versus voluntary use of a respirator. As you mentioned, as you can see, we'll start off here in that, see if this works here. I don't think so. We'll start off in that top green box, right? Respirators, as I mentioned earlier, can be required by the pesticide label. It can be required by permit condition. It can be required by regulation or employer policy. If it's required by any of these, you can see to your left, right, it's a yes, then all components of a written respiratory protection program are required. If it's no, right, that means it's voluntary. We go the opposite way. Now employees are using it on a voluntary basis. You see those two different distinctions. Who is providing that respirator? Is the employer providing it, or is the employee themselves bringing it to work, right? If your employee is bringing their own respirator, we skip down straight to the voluntary respirator use posting, right? You don't have to meet any of the written respiratory training, medical evaluation requirements. All you have to do is post that voluntary respirator use posting in the central area for your employees. But if we go the opposite way, the employer is actually providing that respirator. There's two distinctions, exactly how I mentioned in that previous slide. One is elastomeric. Those are going to be your half-face, your full-face respirators. They have that rubber face piece attached that helps with the seal onto the face. Or are you providing a filtering face piece? If you're providing just a filtering face piece like an N95, then you're not required to meet the requirements of the written respiratory protection program, the training, the medical evaluation, or the voluntary respirator use posting. I'm sorry, that's the only thing that you're required to meet post, right? If you are providing half-face respirators, full-face respirators on a voluntary basis, then you're still required to meet the written respiratory protection program, provide training, a medical evaluation, and still post that voluntary respirator use posting. So I know it's a lot of information, but as I mentioned, it's for that required versus not required voluntary respirator use. All right, so now that I did cover all the PPE requirements, I will be moving into handler decontamination facilities. These requirements are outlined in 3 CCR 6734, which requires that these decontamination facilities must be at the mixing and loading site, right? So where they started the application, where they mixed those pesticides, where they loaded those pesticides onto their backpack sprayer, their pump sprayer, or any type of equipment that you might be using. This decontamination facility must not be more than a quarter mile away from pesticide handlers. So keep that in mind. The distance is also important. And then these are the components that must be available to your employees as they are handling the pesticide. So there must be sufficient water. That is 3 gallons per pesticide handler. So if you got 2 individuals, right, that's 6 gallons of clean water total, or however many individuals you have out there. Aside from that, you are required to provide soap for them, single-use towels, and then 1 clean change of coveralls, right? So these are components, items that they can use to decontaminate themselves in case of some sort of pesticide exposure, a spill, or anything related to the pesticide. So if the pesticide label requires protective eyewear, there is a regulation that actually requires that handlers must hold a pint of water on their person or on their vehicle for emergency eye flushing. So keep that in mind. If you do have any pesticides, that the label requires them to wear that protective eyewear, you also must meet this other PPE requirement that comes from regulation, right? Them having a pint of water on their person or on the equipment that they use for emergency eye flushing in case of an emergency. I do want to go back to the soap component of the decontamination facility. I do want to mention that hand sanitizer is not sufficient, and water must be clean and at temperature that won't cause injury. And it looks like we have a question. Yes.
Yeah, the pint, you said two things. You said it could either be in the vehicle or on the equipment or on the person.
Yes. So the
Those
reason
three locations are acceptable in Monterey?
those three locations are acceptable. I'm not sure. Normally, when it refers to equipment, it refers to application equipment out in the field. Right? They're usually using tractors, spray rigs, things like that. So that's kind of where it would apply. For your guys' operations, I believe you guys use more of like a backpack sprayer, hand pump sprayer, right? In that situation, it'd be best for the individual to carry that pint of water or eye wash on their person, which would be in their pocket or any sort of compartment on what they're wearing.
But you said that it would be acceptable if it was on their vehicle as well, if it was close by or not really?
I would say probably not, right? If it's vehicle, I guess we would refer to it more of like the tractor, right? You know, out in the field. But if they're using a vehicle to kind of transport pesticides from one location to the other, that's not really being used as part of the application equipment. So I would say the best bet for that situation would be on their person.
Just wanted to clarify.
Yeah, definitely. All right, so that is a little bit on hand decontamination facilities. So now that I've covered PPE requirements, training requirements, decontamination facility requirements, I do want to move on to certain information that is required for employees to have available. So you guys as employers are required to have this information available for your pesticide handlers. And one of those pieces of information is application-specific information. These pesticide handlers do have the right to know what has been sprayed in areas that they work in. So the operator of the property must display the following information at a central location for any pesticide handler employees. This information must include the pesticide application records for the last 30 days. So what has been sprayed in the areas that they work in the last 30 days, plus the RAI. And I do want to bring up RAIs. Sometimes RAIs do maybe not applicable to your guys' situation, but out in the field, there are some pesticides that do have an REI of 24 hours, 48 hours. So basically, this is telling you to have records of the last 30 days plus the REI. So if you do have a pesticide that was applied that has a 48-hour REI, basically you're providing records at that point for the last 32 days, right? Because that REI of 48 hours, 2 days also counts. Aside from the pesticide application records, you're also required to provide the safety data sheet for each pesticide. As most of you guys know, right, these safety data sheets do provide all the dangers and hazards, chemical reactions, stability of the pesticide in certain situations. So it's a good resource for employees if they are interested in reading into that information. They do have a right to know about that information. And the pesticide application records that I mentioned, it must include all applications made within a quarter mile of where those employees work. I did earlier mention the word display, and I have it bolded up there. And this is a definition that Department of Pesticide Regulation has created for the word display. Display means to make information available during normal business hours. There must be unimpeded access to viewing these documents without having to make specific requests of any person. So by you, having to have this information displayed for your employees, it must be in a location that is accessible. They must not have to make any specific request from any individual, ask where it's located, or if they can see them, right? They have the right to view this information at any time. So that is the definition of display. And then I also want to cover the definition of restricted entry interval, which is the REI that I mentioned earlier. The REI is any period of time after a greenhouse is treated with a pesticide during which restrictions on entry are in effect to protect persons from potential exposure to hazardous levels of residues. So, right, no person can enter into the area, into the greenhouse after the pesticide has been applied for a specific amount of time. And that specific amount of time will be outlined in the pesticide label of the product that you are applying. All right, another piece of information that must also be displayed and available for employees is your A8 hazard communication for pesticide handlers. This is outlined in 3 CCR 6723. And this is basically a document that talks about the pesticide dangers at work for any pesticide handler. It does include 4 different sections that must be filled out by the employer, and it's usually just records, which includes the application-specific information that I just covered in the previous slide, and I'll go over each section that has to be filled out before you display it for your employees here in the next couple slides. This document can be used to train pesticide handlers, but it doesn't cover all the required topics that are required by regulation. That's something that we've commonly seen before when we conduct audits. Individuals, businesses, are under the impression that this document covers all the required training, but it does not. But it can be used as part of the training program, right? So let's look at all the different sections that has to be filled out before you display it. As I mentioned, right, this is a safety document for your pesticide handlers, talks to them about the dangers at work. One of the requirements is for you to identify where pesticide handlers can obtain emergency medical care. You as an employer are required to plan for medical care in advance, so you must have a medical facility, a hospital that is selected, that you have selected, where your employees will be taken in case of a pesticide-related emergency. It's up to you to verify that that medical facility can handle pesticide-related incidents. If you have a large crew of either pesticide handlers or field workers that may become exposed to pesticides, you are required to take them to emergency medical care and also verify that they can handle the size of your crew as well, right? Depending on how big that office is. So just some things to think about when you are planning for medical care for your employees. So as I mentioned, this document, the A8, does have that section where you fill out the name, address, and telephone of your selected location. And employees and supervisors, foremen are required to know this information, where that specific location is at, either the name, the address, or how to get there. Aside from that, as I mentioned earlier, right, employees do have the right to know what pesticides have been sprayed in the areas where they work at. This refers to the pesticide application specific information that I covered in the previous slides. This document actually identifies it for employees, where exactly is it located. So as you can see, right, this is some of the information that's required, what crop or site was treated, when the application started and ended, REI, things like that. And then you do have that section of where that central location, where these records are located, is going to be at. And you would write the address there. The other section is the right to access and review records. So employees do have the right to review their training records that you provide for them, the training that you provide, and the record of that. So same thing, it's an address location, where are those records located? This informs the employees, pesticide handler employees, on where to find that information. The last section is going to be your organophosphate and carbamate pesticides. This doesn't necessarily apply to you guys because there are no organophosphate and carbamate pesticides being sprayed on cannabis. But for other types of operations that we work with, right, mainly out in the field, these pesticides are used. If you do have an employee who handles these pesticides, there are certain types of testing that must be done, medical testing, before those employees can start handling those pesticides and continue handling those pesticides as well. Just want to cover it here briefly, but it does not apply to cannabis. So now that I've covered the A8, I do want to move on to field postings. This is specifically required by the property operator. The property operator shall assure that signs are posted around treated fields in the following circumstances. 1, when required by the pesticide product labeling, or when applications are made in an entirely enclosed space such as a greenhouse. So that second bullet point is one that would apply to you guys, since cannabis is grown in greenhouses, right? So field postings are required in that situation. Or any application in a partially enclosed space resulting in an REI greater than 4 hours. There are some requirements for these field posting signs. They must be readable from a distance of 25 feet and visible at all usual entry points. They must be posted before the application, but not more than 24 hours in advance. And they must remain posted and legible during the application and the REI. They must be removed within 3 days, which is 72 hours of the REI expiring and before employees enter a field. You never want to send an employee into a field that has field postings right, even if you have said, oh, the REI expired, it's been 4 hours, they can enter. If you still have those signs up, legally, they're still not allowed to enter. You must remove those signs prior to them entering that field. And I've been saying field right, you guys are cannabis growers, you guys don't work out in the field, it's more greenhouses. Field still refers to areas like greenhouses as well. So these posting signs must contain the skull and crossbones symbol near the center of the sign, the words danger and peligro, pesticides and pesticidas in the upper portion, and the words keep out and no entre in the lower portion, so in English and Spanish. Here in Monterey County, there is a local posting regulation actually that requires that fields are posted when pesticide applications are made to growing crops with an REI of 24 hours or longer. So if you do spray some sort of pesticide that has an REI of 24 hours or longer, here in Monterey County, it's a local regulation. You are required to post that field, even if it's not required by the pesticide label or any other requirement. This does not apply to non-crop, dormant crop, pre-plant, pre-emergent applications when they are not made onto plant foliage. Greenhouses must be posted for all applications regardless of REI. So that's something that applies to you guys. Greenhouses must always be posted. If posted obviously right, employees are not allowed in that greenhouse. Do not go in.
Who sells those caution signs here?
These caution signs, from my understanding, I know you can definitely order them online. Pest control businesses and pest control dealers that sell pesticides may also have them available. I believe, and don't take my word for this, but I believe the Farm Bureau can also help in obtaining these types of signs.
Thank
Is
you.
there any rule around, like, can you just print it out yourself? Does it have to be a certain size?
You can print it out yourself as long as you can make sure it withstands,
Elements?
the elements, sun, dust, water, whatever, rain. And as I mentioned earlier, it does have, let me find that specific section there. It must be readable from a distance of 25 feet and visible at all points of entry. So as long as you can meet these requirements here, right, and have the specific wording and stuff, you can print them out yourself. I don't see why not.
This specifically, you're talking about like the signage for area that's being sprayed, not necessarily storage.
Exactly. So this is talking about field postings. Yeah. Pesticide storage postings are a little bit, I'm not covering it as part of today's, but if you have any questions or anything, we definitely answer it after for you. All right, so moving on to enclosed space ventilation criteria. If a pesticide requires a respirator and is applied by any method, or if a pesticide is applied as a fumigant, smoke, mist, fine spray, fog, or aerosol inside an enclosed space, ventilation shall continue until 1, the concentration is measured and found not to exceed any pesticide product labeling standard, or 2, one of the following has occurred if there is no labeling standard. 10, air exchanges are complete. 2 hours of mechanical ventilation, such as with fans. 4 hours of passive ventilation, such as opening vents, windows, or doors. 24 hours with no ventilation, or any combination of the above, and the sum of which equals 100%. So this is for enclosed space and the ventilation requirement criteria there. All right, so now that I covered pesticide handlers, I do want to go into safety requirements and training for field workers, starting off with the definition of a field worker, which is outlined in 3 CCR 6000. A field worker is any person who, for any kind of compensation, performs cultural activities in a field, such as pruning, harvesting, thinning, or watering, right? It does not include persons performing tasks as a crop advisor, including field checking or scouting, making observations of the well-being of plants, or taking samples, nor does it include us, which would be local, state, or federal officials performing inspection, sampling, or other official duties. So that is the definition of a field worker. If you do employ field workers right, there is specific training that must be conducted for these field workers, since they do work in areas where pesticides are applied. Field workers are required to be trained before working in a treated field, and I do want to cover the definition of a treated field. Once again, that field word there, right, but this also applies to greenhouse areas. A treated field is a field that has been treated with any pesticide or has had a restricted entry interval or entry restricted period in effect within the last 30 days. So if you have sprayed any area with pesticides in the last 30 days and you have employees working there, right, maybe trimming the plants, moving them around, anything like that, they are considered field workers working in a treated field, and they are required to receive this training. Training must be in a manner that can be understood using non-technical terms in a location free from distraction. And as I mentioned, for pesticide handlers, the individual who trains field workers in California also has to have a certification. And that certification can be any of the following, which is the same as pesticide handlers. You've got your commercial applicators, your individuals who hold qualified applicator licenses or qualified applicator certificates. You also got the private applicators certificate holders, PCAs, which are your agricultural pest control advisors, registered professional foresters, and individuals who complete that train-the-trainer program that I covered at the beginning of the presentation. So briefly wanted to cover that training requirement for field workers. If you do have field work being conducted during a pesticide application, there is application exclusion zones that you and your employees must meet. This is outlined in 3 CCR 6762, which states that no person shall be directed or allowed to enter or remain in the application exclusion zone. For enclosed space production like a greenhouse, which would apply to you guys, the application exclusion zone is defined as follows. The entire enclosed space plus any adjacent area that is not sealed from the treatment site when the pesticide is applied as a space treatment like a fumigant, smoke, fog, or aerosol or mist, or is a pesticide for which the label requires respiratory protection until ventilation criteria have been met. 2, the entire enclosed space when the pesticide is applied using a fine spray until the ventilation criteria have been met. And 3, the treatment site plus 25 feet in all directions within the enclosed space when the pesticide is applied as a spray from a height greater than 12 inches from the soil or other planting media, or as a spray of medium or larger. And you can always use the American Society of Agricultural and Biological Engineers Standard 572.1 to measure and interpret spray quality, what is considered fine, medium, or coarse. Just as there are decontamination requirements for pesticide handlers, there are decontamination requirements for field workers. So anytime you have a field worker working in a treated area, employers shall assure that the following are located together. Water, which would be 1 gallon per employee, which is versus 3 gallons, right, for pesticide handlers. Or if you have early entry workers, it's also 3 gallons for them. Soap must also be available, and then single-use towels. This must be located within a quarter mile of each field worker or at the closest point of vehicular access. So these are field worker decontamination facility requirements. Same thing, you are also required to provide application-specific information for field workers. They have the right to know what has been sprayed in the areas where they work in, and this will include pesticide application records for the last 30 days plus the REI and the safety data sheet for each pesticide as well. This information must be displayed after completion of an application and before any field worker enters that area to start work. A9, hazard communication for field workers, so I covered the A8, which is specific to pesticide handlers. The A9 is specific to field workers. So same thing, this document does have to be displayed and filled out at a central location, and these are some of those locations. So one at the worksite right, all permanent decontamination facilities, or decontamination facilities servicing 11 or more field workers. Same thing as with this document, there are 4 different sections that must be filled out. Can be used for training, but doesn't necessarily cover all the training topics for field workers as well. Same thing, emergency medical care section identifies the name, address, the telephone number of your selected facility. Once again, the application specific information, where is that location at? As you can see, the central location address, but this one here for field workers does have another section, which is how to find the information, which is basically a description on how to find it. This individual, by reading this, should be able to find it exactly where it's located. The examples you can see there, right? It's on a binder on top of a filing cabinet in the main office lobby. So address and a description there. And then I do want to finish off with this slide. This is my last slide. Kind of encompasses everything that I have talked about today for employee safety, whether it be your pesticide handlers or your field workers. This is code section 3 CCR 6702B and 6760A, which states that the employer shall assure safe work practices, including all applicable regulations and pesticide product labeling requirements. The employer must also comply with the requirements to protect employees who may enter treated fields, and the employer has the duty to provide a safe workplace for employees and require employees to follow safe practices. With that said, I do want to open it up to questions. I don't know if we have some time yet. I believe we do. But if there are any questions, if you don't want to ask here in person, you can also reach me in the back after the presentation during the break. Or we do have our direct pesticide use enforcement unit number there and our email address if you do have any questions. Thank you.
I have a question. On the PPE, you touched on some of the things that are required in regards to labeling.
Mm-hmm.
What about like maintenance and cleaning of that? Is there anything in regulations about that?
Yes, so that's actually one of the slides that I covered. The employer is actually required to inspect that PPE daily before it's worn, and is required to replace any heavily damaged or worn contaminated PPE. So that's also part of the requirement of providing the PPE, and it's written in regulation as well.
But as far as how to maintain it, how to clean it?
How to maintain it and how to clean it. Normally, the manufacturer of the PPE will have some sort of requirement or guidance on how to clean things, so you can reach out to the manufacturer of the respirator, of the chemical-resistant gloves, or whatever other type of PPE to get some guidance on how to clean those PPE items. I think that's it. Thank you all for your time.
So up next, we have Jessica Paredes presenting employer record keeping requirements.
Good morning, everyone. Hope everyone is doing okay. My name is Jessica Paredes. I am an agricultural inspector biologist here for the Monterey County Agricultural Commissioner's Office, specifically in the pesticide use enforcement department. And today we're going to be covering employer record keeping requirements. So honestly, my presentation is going to go over a lot of information that my coworkers Sarah and Sergio already went over, but just a little bit more into detail and exactly what we need to have in record keeping to be in compliance. So employee pesticide training records are a critical part of workplace safety and regulatory compliance. These records document that employees receive the required pesticide safety information before beginning work and on an annual basis as required by Title III of California Code of Regulations. Proper record keeping helps employers demonstrate compliance during county or Department of Pesticide Regulation inspections. It protects employees by verifying that they were trained on hazard and safe work practices. And it also helps us confirm language appropriate training was provided. But most importantly, training records help show that employees were given the knowledge they need to work safely around pesticides, understand their rights, and know what to do in case of a pesticide emergency. So some of the topics that we will be covering, we are gonna go over record keeping for pesticide handlers, field workers, pesticide applications and information. And then we will go over record retention requirements, what should be maintained, and how long should it be retained for. And also pesticide use reports, use report responsibility for the employer. So just to kind of go over a little bit more about what my coworker Sarah went over, our inspection authority, 3 CCR section 6140. So the commissioner may enter and inspect and/or sample fields, areas, structures, and greenhouses where pesticides are handled, stored, or applied, grower crops and harvested commodities, equipment used to store, transport, or handle pesticides, change areas and other facilities used by employees, pesticides and tanks mixes. Each person responsible for preparing and maintaining records shall make those records available to the commissioner upon demand. So that's kind of where my presentation comes into effect. The required records include records concerning work hours, training, and medical monitoring of employees, pest control recommendations and pesticide use and operation records, pesticide transactions, sales, and delivery records. So as some of you in the industry know, you get inspectors here and there, other agencies maybe, as well as for our department, you might be in contact with us as the Pesticide Use Enforcement Department, but also some inspectors like weights and measures who will be verifying scales and so on. So we're going to go over who is a pesticide handler again, so we could transition into the training programs. So it's not just someone who is doing the application with pesticides, it also includes someone who is mixing, loading, transferring, assisting with the application, including flagging, maintaining, servicing, repairing, cleaning, or handling equipment used that may contain residues, working with open containers of pesticides, adjusting, repairing, or removing treatment site coverings, and other handling activities specified by the pesticide label. If you have employees, make sure you are distinguishing what they are. Are they handlers, if they meet any of these requirements, or are they field workers? When we are conducting these trainings, we want to make sure that we are having the appropriate training for them, right? So if you have a person who does like trimming or something similar, moving of plants, then that would be considered more of a field worker, which we'll talk about in a few slides. But if you have someone who is a field worker, but let's say that this certain day they're helping with repairing equipment, and they are repairing and servicing something that contains residues, then at that point they become handlers. So keep that in mind once you're training to make sure we're training in the adequate categories. Okay, so a little bit on handler training. The training program shall describe the materials and information that will be provided and used to train his or her employees, and identify the individual or firm that will provide the training. So back in the table where we're at, we do have plenty of training documents. And so this first one would be the training program. So this training program looks like this. It's a total of about 4 pages. The beginning of the program begins with putting the name of the employer, and then moving on to putting who is doing the training, So it's super important that whoever is conducting this training is certified, as both Sarah and Sergio mentioned. Then we move on to filling out the training materials. Those could be your A8s, your A9s, and other pamphlets and videos. DPR, Department of Pesticide Regulation, actually has really good videos online that you're more than welcome to use to conduct this training. Then we move on to the actual pesticide names and the safety data. Did you go over that? If you're using maybe 5 pesticides in the beginning of the year, and then later on in the year, your pest control advisor recommends you other pesticides, make sure we also conduct training on those new pesticides if you haven't done so already. Second page goes into talking about when the written program went into effect and when the written program was retired. Usually we see the annual training. So for example, if you did training in May 1st of 2025, then they will retire May 1st of 2026. So on an annual basis, as we mentioned earlier, and then we go into circling the training topics you went over, and that is all for the training program. And then as a reminder for that, the employer shall maintain a copy of the training program while in use and for 2 years after use. When we conduct headquarter inspections, we definitely look over training programs, and we ensure that you are covering all the topics required by Regulation 3 CCR 6724A. So super important to keep these. Like I said, we have these templates available here in our office and on DPR's website, but you're more than welcome to create your own template. I recommend you use ours. I mean, all the information already is on there that will meet all the requirements of the regulation, but again, you're more than welcome to create your own. This is something we will definitely be looking at during an inspection. Okay, then we move on to training record. So the employer shall ensure that employees who handle pesticides have been trained, right? The date and extent of initial and annually required training given to the employee and the job to be assigned shall be recorded. So back there as well, we have the program, and now we have a training record. So this record, in the beginning of it, talks about, let's see, we need to fill out what the employer name is, what the employee's name is, the date of the training, who is the trainer who did the training, the signature of the employee, and then their assigned job duties. So if you have mixers and loaders, if you have actual applicators or service and repair personnel, then we move on to filling out the title and sources of the training materials used. And then finally, we go over each pesticide. Did you go over the label? Did you go over the SDSs, the hazards of the pesticides, and signs and symptoms of exposure? And then the employee and the trainer has to initial each one of them. So just for a reminder, one training program per company, only one, and then a training record per employee. So sometimes when we're doing these record inspections, we do notice that sometimes you have only the training records, but you forget to have a training program. And we have these available, just remember, one per company, and then one training record per employee. So if you have, for example, sometimes we see that maybe half of your crew begins in January as you get started, and then the season starts ramping up, so in June we'll have another 10 coming in. Make sure that we're actually conducting the training for everyone who is going to be in contact with any type of pesticides or where pesticides were applied. So super important to keep record of those and actually put the dates of when these trainings were covered. We will check that. And then these training records also have to be maintained for 2 years, and they have to be kept at a central location at the workplace that's accessible to the employees. At any moment, they can ask for their training records, and you have to have them provided for them. Okay, we're going to move on to respiratory protection, as Sergio mentioned. So the written program is a little bit more complex. I believe the respiratory protection requirements are somewhat difficult to understand even for us inspectors. We really want to sit down. If at any moment your employees are using any type of respirator, you're more than welcome to come into our office and we'll sit down with you and explain, all the requirements. It's quite a lot of requirements, right? I believe Sergio went over the diagram that shows if it's required by label, if it's required by employer, by permit conditions, and so on. And then you follow the diagram to see if it's it was provided by the employer or if the employee themselves brought it onto the work area. So if you do, it is required by label. Let's say, for example, you do need to have, or employer regulation, I'm sorry, you do need to have a written program for this as well. So the employer shall establish a written respiratory program with work site-specific procedures. So let me just go over it. Also, template is online for this one. It's pretty big. It's about maybe 30-something pages long. But we also include some like evaluation forms in here. We include the voluntary use display that has to be posted if it's voluntary. But it also goes through like who is the respiratory protection person who will be keeping tabs on this program. Like, does it expire? Are we using different respirators? And then we go on to filling out the portion where it says what kind of respirator is being used, how to clean the respirator, how do you check the cartridges that are used for the respirator. So it goes into a lot of detail for respirators, and this is something that we definitely look over during headquarters inspections as well. And you want to keep this program in place. Let's see, so you want to keep that program along with your medical evaluations and fit test records when applicable. These have to be kept for a total of 3 years after the end of employment, and any previous versions shall be retained for 3 years. Most of the requirements that I talk about are only 2 years, but this specific one is 3 years. So keep that in mind for respiratory stuff. Okay, we're going to move on to emergency medical care, specifically for pesticide handlers. Emergency medical care for employees handling pesticides shall be planned for in advance. Employees shall be informed of the name and location of the facility, and the employer shall post in a prominent place at the work site or for vehicle if there is no designated work site the name, the address, and the telephone number of this emergency medical care facility. One of the things that I really want to emphasize here is, so I believe Sergio went over like the definition of display, and that's just to have available at our work location, right? But this one does say post, if you see here. And when it says post, it actually means post. Sometimes we see this out in the field, like when we're conducting inspections on anyone who's inside of a tractor. They can't have this information inside their wallet or somewhere in a binder. It actually has to be posted. And most of the time we see this posted on the window of the driver door, or we'll see it posted like in the back of their window, or in their work truck if they're using a work truck for any type of pesticide application. So super important to keep that in mind. This does have to be posted. And then we're going to move on to hazard communication for pesticide handlers, which is also known as A8. So the employer shall maintain at a central workplace location and accessible the pesticide use records, SDSs for each pesticide listed in the pesticide use records, and copies of the PSIS leaflets applicable to the pesticide and handling activities. So Sergio went into great detail for this one, but I just want to show you physically what it looks like. It's orange and bright, and when we conduct inspections and we do interviews on handlers, we will ask them if they have seen this or they have been trained on this. So make sure that we have this available for them, and whenever we are going over training, we are training them in this. So just as Sergio mentioned, we go over the medical emergency care, make sure that is filled out, the name, the address, and the telephone number. Next page goes over the right to know. So at what location is the information found at, regular training records, and also pesticide use reports. It goes on to tell you who do I tell about dangers at work. That includes our number, your local ag commission number, and also DPR's pest line number as well. And then their rights. So basically, what pesticide training should I get? So it tells them about how they should receive training each year, which is what we're going over today, and all that good stuff. And then it goes over the organophosphate and carbamide pesticides. And then lastly, some safety tips on how to protect your skin, what to do in case of an illness, and any first aid situations. So these A8s, what we've noticed is employers do have them, but they're not filled out or they're not at the appropriate locations. Also, we want to see everything together. So when it comes to the pesticide use records, the SDSs, and the copies of the PSIS leaflets, we want to make sure that that is all together in one area at the central workplace. Okay, so application-specific information for handlers. The operator of the property used for the commercial or research production of an ag plant commodity shall display at a central location the crop or site treated and identification of the treated area, the date and time the application started and ended, restricted entry intervals, product name, EPA number, and active ingredients, copy of the SDSs for the applied pesticides. This information shall be displayed within 24 hours of the completion, and it must remain displayed until the area is no longer a treated field. And just a reminder, what is a treated field? It is an area that has been, where pesticides have been applied within the last 30 days, plus the REI. This must be kept for 2 years as well. During inspections, when we do headquarters inspections, we do notice sometimes that there's information missing. For example, the restricted entry interval, and then the time, the date and time the application started and ended. You do have to follow all the requirements listed here. If you're missing one, that is you being not in compliance with the regulation. Once this is not a considered a treated field, you can remove the area from the information from the display and then put it into your record. So it doesn't have to be up there for 2 years. It just has to be displayed while the definition of treated field is in effect. Okay, so this is just a little bit more on what the A8 looks like. I went over it, but if you guys want any copies or anything, I know Department of Pesticide Regulation also has templates of this one, but they also have poster boards. So basically that poster board is a big template that has A8s in English and Spanish. and where you could fill it out, you can laminate it and post it up in your, in a central location. Okay, we are done talking about handlers. We're not gonna move over to field workers. So just some reminders, who is a field worker? It's any person for any kind of compensation that performs culture activities in the field, or in this case, like a greenhouse setting. What is a treated field? It's a field that has been treated with a pesticide or had a restricted entry interval or entry restricted period in effect within the last 30 days. This includes roads, paths, ditches, borders, and headlands, or greenhouses if the pesticide was directed to those certain areas. So just as I mentioned earlier, make sure you know what kind of work your employees are doing. Are they considered handlers? Are they considered field workers? And just keep that in mind. So for field worker training, we also have some templates for the record. So the employer shall assure that each employee assigned to work in a treated field has been trained within the last 12 months before beginning work in a treated field. The record must include the following. So for example, let me see. Yeah, here it is, the training record. So similar to the handler record, it starts off with filling out the name of the employer, the date of the training. You can also put the crew foreman, that's optional, or the crew number, also optional. The next portion is the name of the trainer, who also has to be certified, as we mentioned, or licensed. And then we go over checking off the training topics as required by 3 CCR 6764. So basically, it talks over like, did you go over where and in what forms pesticides and residues may be encountered? Did you go over how employees must not take pesticides home? So we have all these check marks for you to make sure we're covering all those training topics. At the end of the first page, it does have some reminders about how each employee must be trained within the last 12 months or before assignment to work in a treated field. So similar to how I mentioned earlier, if you have crews coming in January and that's only half of your staff, and then in June as the season starts wrapping up, you have another 15, every single employee has to be trained. It's not like, oh, I already conducted one training once a year and I'm done. Absolutely not. Every single employee has to be trained, whether they're field workers or handlers. One important thing to keep in mind though is, I don't know if you noticed, field workers training does not have a field worker program, but handlers do. So like I mentioned earlier, a program, 1 per company, and a record, 1 per employee. For field workers is 1 record per employee, and that's it. So the reason being is because the handler training does cover a lot more topics. So with that being said, you can train field workers, all your field workers as handlers, but you can't train your handlers as field workers. Why? Because this doesn't cover everything and this one does. So I don't know, if you want to take the extra time and just maybe train everyone as handlers, you never know when maybe you're short-staffed on handlers and you want to pull a field worker to do handling activities such as repairing equipment or anything that might have residue. I don't know, it's up to you guys, but we do have the 2 differences. If not, you can train everyone as handlers, okay? All right, we're going to move on to emergency medical care, and this is going to be for field workers. So one thing to really keep in mind, emergency medical care is different for both, but at the end of the day, it's pretty similar. But just make sure that we are looking over the regulation for both of them and make sure we're covering every single requirement. As you can tell, we only kind of skimmed the top of it, the most important portions, but we leave the regulation up for you so you can go in there and really go into every single detail and make sure that we're covering every single thing. So emergency medical care for employees who enter fields that have been treated with pesticides shall be planned for in advance. And as Sergio mentioned, these facilities, you want to make sure that they cover your biggest crew. If at one point you need to take your biggest crew, right? So we've gone in situations where sometimes the hospital calls us and says, hey, like we don't understand what's going on. It's like, technically the employer should have already planned this way in advance and make sure that they can receive employees who have been potentially exposed to pesticides and that they can accommodate a crew of 60, right? Sometimes some clinics or hospitals cannot accommodate all 60. So you're prolonging the time of when they can receive emergency medical care. So just super important to have that already planned for in advance and let the employees know, right? If you have employees that work in different areas, it's not really common for cannabis since you guys are more centralized, but more in the row crop industry, right? We have growers who are pretty big. We have some that work in Salinas, in Gonzales, in King City, all throughout the county. We do have like portions of like the A9, which is what I'm gonna talk about later on, where it has only a small box of the hospitals to put in there. You can always put C attached and then put a list of all the hospitals in the back. So you could put a hospital in Salinas, a hospital in Gonzales, a hospital in King City, basically based on where they're working that day, that they can go to the clinic that's closest to them, depending on work day. So with that being said, we're gonna move on to hazard communication with, for field workers, which is gonna be the A9. So whenever employees are working as field workers in a treated field, the employer shall display at the work site and decontamination facilities a copy of the A9 that looks like this. The operator of the property shall maintain at a central workplace location and accessible the pesticide use records and SDS for every pesticide, for each pesticide listed in the pesticide use records. So I'm just gonna skim over this. It goes over again, medical care. If you don't have enough space here, then we can go ahead and put C attached and put a list at the back of this with all the clinics. Right to know is on there as well, so where are you keeping the training documents, such as the written programs and the training records. Who do I tell dangers at work? So that's gonna be us, the Ag Commissioner's Office. I believe that one doesn't have a space, the A8 does not have a space to fill out the Ag Commissioners, but this one does. So you wanna basically fill out our address and our telephone number, so that the workers can give us a call if they ever have any questions, concerns, or complaints. And then we do have a little bit more on, let's see, what will I be told about nearby pesticide applications? What does the restricted entry interval mean, the REI? Talks a little bit about washing clothes and how to do that. How can I tell when it's safe to go into a field that an REI is in effect? And yeah, just a lot of information, and then it ends with some safety tips at the end as well. So this one has to be displayed at the worksite and decontamination facility servicing 11 or more field workers. Okay. And then same as handlers, we do have the application specific information for field workers. The operator of the property used for commercial or research production of an agricultural plant commodity shall display at a central location the crop and or site treated and identification of the treated field, the date and time the application started and ended, restricted entry interval, product names, EPAs, and active ingredients, spray adjuvant product names, and California registration numbers if applicable, and finally the copy of SDSs for the applied pesticides. One thing that we've noticed during headquarters inspections, we've noticed that sometimes the SDSs are not all the SDSs are displayed that you have been for products that you have been applying. So for example, maybe you only use 5 pesticides throughout the year, so you have those 5 SDSs, but maybe throughout the year your pest control advisor says, you know what, we're gonna try 2 different ones, and you forget to put the SDSs, and that is you being not in compliance with the this requirement. So make sure if you ever use a new pesticide or any of those things, we are getting a copy of those SDSs and putting it into the application specific information display. So this display must be up before any field workers are allowed to enter a treated field and remain displayed until the area is no longer a treated field. Once it's no longer a treated field, you can go ahead and remove them and put them into your records and keep these for the current year plus 2 years past. So during inspections, we do check that, make sure that you have all those documents. And again, if we see that you are not in compliance, you will probably receive like a non-compliance. So just a little bit more on the A9s and what they look like. Again, we have those available for you in the back, but we also have links to our website and Department of Pesticide Regulation, where you're more than welcome to download and fill these out yourself. So we're going to move on to pesticide application information and other records. So this specific one talks about application completion records. So any person applying pesticides for the commercial or research production of an agricultural plant commodity shall ensure that the operator of the property treated receives notice orally or in writing and within 24 hours of completion of the pesticide application, where the location of the property is, pesticide product names, EPA numbers, and active ingredients, spray adjuvant product names and California registration numbers, date and time the application started and ended, and applicable re-entry and pre-harvest intervals, unless a copy of a written rec was provided. Some of these, you can kind of like double dip in the regulations. For example, if a pest control advisor provides you like a recommendation, usually, not always, a recommendation already has all the information. The only thing your handlers need to do now is go ahead and put in the time that they started the application and ended the application. And then you can grab that and use that as your completion records. But yeah, these records have to be maintained for 2 years as well. We definitely do check these as well. Okay, moving on to site numbers. I believe site identification numbers, my coworker Sarah also went over this. So prior to the use of pesticides for the production of an ag commodity, the operator of the property shall obtain site identification numbers from the commissioner in which pest control will be performed. Site identification numbers shall be recorded by the operator, by the commissioner, on an operator identification number known as an OIN. So basically, this looks like this. So if you guys have any operations and you are the agent or the owner, you are familiar with what an OIN looks like. The top is usually our information and our address, our phone numbers, then the operation identification number. Basically, this number follows you, follows your permit, is unique to your operator identification number. Then it goes on to having your information as an agent, mailing address, physical address, when it is valid and when it expires. We do check this during records inspections, making sure that if there's any overlap, you weren't applying pesticides without obtaining an operator identification number with our office. And then as far as the site identification or site ID, we do have an example here. For example, this is site 3 with the commodity of carrots with a total of 5 acres. So in your situation, it would be maybe you have a greenhouse in Salinas, that would be your site 1. Then you have a greenhouse in Moss Landing, that would be your site 02 with your total square feet. So that's kind of what it looks like. Unless your company has separate company names or different entities, for the most part, if you have one company name, just different sites, you only need one operator identification number, and then your sites are listed down here. So 1 through 5, or however many sites you have. And then this also needs to be kept for a total of 2 years. We do definitely check this and make sure that they are filled out and signed by an inspector as well. A little bit on annual notification of school sites. So for all applications of pesticides expected to be made for an ag commodity, which is cannabis definitely is, within a quarter mile of a school site, the operator shall provide annual notification to the school. And this information must be retained for 2 years and current year. So basically these notifications, CALAC permits usually lets you download the notification that was sent to the school. So that shows us that you sent the notification, or you can log in and show us that you actually know how to submit the school notification, and we'll go based off on that as well. But the most important thing here is that these notifications are submitted, and you can show us proof that they were submitted to be in compliance with this requirement. Okay, a little bit on pesticide use records for production agriculture. The operator of the property, which is producing an agricultural commodity, shall report the use of pesticides applied to the product, the commodity, or site. The report must be submitted by the 10th of the following month. If you apply in March, we want to see it by the 10th of April. If you apply in April, by the 10th of the following month. This report is not required if pest control businesses apply pesticide applications and provides a report. However, the operator shall retain a copy of the pest control business report. Sometimes we do see non-compliances here where it's like, yes, the grower is doing some applications and they're keeping that record, but the pest control business also comes on certain days and does those applications. But for whatever reason you're not keeping this report, that is, you're not being in compliance. You also need to keep reports of their applications and you as a grower applications. This information must be retained for 2 years as well. Okay, next up is pesticide use reports, so as I mentioned, but for FIFRA. So FIFRA 25B products, those are exempt from reporting. You don't have to submit those to our office. However, they're not exempt from record keeping. So everything that I mentioned earlier in regards to the handler training, handler written program, completion records, and pesticide use records. Pesticide use records and pesticide use reports are 2 different things, so don't confuse those. So handler training, make sure we're going over 25B products. Handler written program, make sure we're writing down the 25B products. Any completion reports, when did you start the application, when did you end the application of these 25B products. So those you still need to have record keeping of these, you just don't have to submit the reports to our office. So don't confuse the two. If you guys have any questions on those, on this certain portion of the regulation, please contact us and we're more than happy to explain it, sit down with you and explain it. All right, and lastly, I just want to go over everything. All the code sections I went over. Like I mentioned, we just skim over these, we're also going to be here all day, which is totally fine. We're more than happy to provide guidance and educate in our office. You're more than welcome to come by. But we do have this printed out in the back. You're more than welcome to grab a copy of this one. But basically, everything I went over today, we went over the written handler training programs and the retention of 2 years, handler training record with the retention of 2 years, respirator protection written program, 3 years, and everything else is 2 years. We have templates available for you. We have all the information available for you. Just come to our office and let us know what you need. We're more than happy to help. Okay, and that is all I have for you guys today. If you have any questions, we'll be in the back. Here is our information as well. Do we have any questions right now? I believe we do have a few minutes.
I had a question. So you said that if they want, they can do handler training
Mhm.
for everybody,
Correct.
and then they don't need field worker training.
Correct, because handler training basically covers a lot more than the field worker training, but you can't train a handler as a field worker, because you would be missing
If you
requirements.
decide to do handler training for all employees, do you need to post 9? KSIS.
Let me look into that, and I don't quite remember, but we will definitely look into that. We're in the back. Let me look up the regulation and see if it still needs to be on there. I believe there are some requirements on there that do apply specifically to field workers, so I believe we still need it, because technically they are still considered field workers, just in some days considered handlers. So let me look into that, and I'll let you know about that one, okay? Yeah, any other questions? Okay, perfect, thank you guys so much.
And to finish off, we have Marco Fernandez, who will be presenting pesticides approved for use on cannabis.
All right, so good morning, everyone. My name is Marco Fernandez. I am an agriculture inspector, biologist at the Monterey County Ag Commissioner's Office, more specifically in the pesticide use enforcement unit. And so today I'm going to be presenting on pesticides that are approved for the use on cannabis and other related topics. So the topics that I'll be covering for this particular presentation would be cannabis as an agricultural commodity, how is cannabis different from other commodities, pesticide use on cannabis, cannabis approved products, and illegal pesticide use. And so I'm sure you guys already heard this today. The Department of Pesticide Regulation has determined that cannabis meets the definition of an agricultural commodity under Code Section 6000. So essentially, cannabis is treated similar to traditional crops like fruits, vegetables, and nuts. And so, although cannabis is considered an agricultural commodity in California, it is not recognized as such at the federal level. And so as a result, the Environmental Protection Agency does not establish any pesticide residue tolerance limits for cannabis, and cannabis is not typically, or is not included on any pesticide labels. And so even without the clear label guidance that exists for other crops, unfortunately for cannabis growers, they are still required to fully comply with with all pesticide laws and regulations. This means that Division 6 and 7 of the California Food and Agriculture Code applies to cannabis just as it does with any other crops, right? And so, for example, as Sarah mentioned earlier, the property operator must obtain an operator identification number. They must report all pesticide use to the county. Sergio discussed the required employee training and all the safety requirements that need to be met. And as my colleague Jessica just covered, all those records must be properly kept and maintained for their specific amount of time, right? And so by meeting all these requirements, cannabis growers remain in compliance with Division 6 and 7 of the Food and Agriculture Code. And so we do understand that the cannabis industry, there's a lot to that, right? You guys have to meet compliance with a lot of departments and other agencies, not just our office. We understand that cannabis does go through a unique seed-to-sale tracking system compared to the regular common crops. However, pesticide laws and regulations enforced by DPR apply throughout the entire life cycle, right? More specifically in the cultivation stage. And And so during the cultivation stage, any pesticide use must be in compliance with DPR requirements. And because cannabis products are also subject to strict testing standards, it's important to note that even approved products can result in residue test failures due to higher use rates, higher frequencies, and also the time of application during cultivation, right? And so this makes proper compliance at the cultivation stage specifically critical, as issues may not surface until much more later in the process. All right. However, the most unique aspect of cannabis is that it is regulated federally, right? Under the Controlled Substance Act, cannabis is classified under Schedule 1, which is a category used for drugs, substances, or chemicals that have not been yet accepted for any medical purposes. It's also deemed as a drug to have high potential for abuse, right? So obviously the Drug Enforcement Administration and the Food and Drug Administration are comparing cannabis to heroin, LSD, ecstasy, and so much more. But because of this classification, this is the reason why the Environmental Protection Agency has not registered any pesticides specifically for the use on cannabis. And so in this case, the state of California does rely on strict guidance and oversight by DPR to determine which products may be used on cannabis under specific conditions. And so I do understand that there has been ongoing discussions at the federal level about rescheduling cannabis. If that happens, it could allow agencies like EPA to take a step forward in terms of the evaluation process that they have to go through. However, it's a very long process. And so moving on to pesticide use on cannabis. Pesticide use on cannabis is important as DPR's primary mission is to protect human health and the environment. And they do this through various efforts. Obviously, the most obvious is pesticide regulation, right? And so DPR works closely with different departments, more specifically the Department of Cannabis Control. And what they do is they help them set pesticide residue limits, which are then used when testing cannabis products. And so obviously us, the Monterey County Ag Commissioner's Office, we work very closely with DPR. Our job is to enforce these laws and regs at a more local level. And finally, just to mention, DPR does have a cannabis program, right? I will be covering some of their material in this presentation, but I ultimately do encourage each and every one of you in the cannabis industry to visit this website, as there is a lot of good resources for you, including the approved pesticide list of approved products that can be used on cannabis. And so the Department of Pesticide Regulation has offered 3 different pest control options that can be used in operations. The first one is integrated pest management approach, right? This is a prevention-based strategy that reduces pest pressure through sanitation, monitoring, using biologicals, while also reserving chemical pesticide as the last resort. Another option would be to use 25B products. 25B products are considered minimum risk pesticides. These products are exempt from EPA registration, but are still regulated in California, right? Finally, growers may use pesticide products that meet California's criteria for legal use, and all these products can be found on the DPR approved list. And so DPR developed a criteria for legal pesticide use, which basically says that a pesticide product can legally be applied to cannabis under state law as long as the active ingredient found in the product are, for one, exempt from residue tolerance and from registration. These would be your 25B products. Or 2, exempt from residue tolerance requirement, and the use of product will not be legally considered a use in conflict with registered label. And so what does this mean? And so a residue tolerance exemption means that EPA has determined that the active ingredient is low risk and does not require a maximum residue limit. And so in general, residue is the amount of pesticide residue that is allowed to remain in or on a treated crop with a reasonable certainty of no harm. These pesticides will also be exempt from federal registration under the Federal Insecticide, Rodenticide Act due to their low toxicity. So this is covering the first criteria. Together, these exemptions indicate that the product is considered to pose minimal risk to human health when used as directed. And so another key requirement, in addition to meeting the exemption criteria, is that the product must not be used in conflict with its label. And so typically in every label, under the label's direction for use section, you will find the following language that reads something to the effect of, it is a violation of federal law to use this product in a manner inconsistent with its labeling. Do not apply this product in a way that it will contact workers or other persons, either directly through drift. Only protected handlers may be in the area during application, and so forth, right? So as always, follow the label. The label is the law. It's important to follow all application rates, making sure that you are using the required PPE that is listed on the label, and so forth. Now, in this example, we have Zero Toll, which is a federally registered pesticide label for use on hemp. Although hemp and cannabis come from the same plant species, they are regulated differently in California. So as you may all know, the allowed THC percent on hemp is about 0.3%. Anything above that is considered cannabis. And so because of that, a product label for hemp is not automatically allowed for use on cannabis. And so in this example, Zero Toll does appear on the DPR cannabis pesticide list, so it is an approved product. However, the main point that I'm trying to make here is that you may encounter other products with labels that include hemp, but those products may not be legal for use on cannabis. So as I always say, it's very important to check that approved list to see if that product comes out in, if that product is approved. In some cases, a pesticide may be used on crops or sites not specifically listed on the label, but only when the label language is broad enough to allow such use, right? So an example of broad language may include statements such as, for use on agriculture use sites, including but not limited to the following, or other miscellaneous crops, including but not limited to. And so because of this ambiguity, determining whether use is allowed requires careful review of the label. And so in the event that you are unsure whether a product can be used on cannabis, again, I recommend that you do look at the product list or of the approved product list to see if they do come out in that particular, if they are listed. If still in doubt, consult your local county ag commissioner's office. That's what we're here for. Any comments, concerns, questions, we'll be more than happy to help. So in this example, we do have equal words. This label has broad language to some extent. At the beginning of this label, it does specify that it can be used on indoor and outdoor ornamentals. It doesn't necessarily specify which ones, right? It also includes the phrases including but not limited to. And although it does specify some crops, this is basically telling you that it's not limited to these particular crops that are listed. Finally, paying close attention to which settings can a product be applied to is important because it is also part of label compliance. And I do say that because some labels can be very specific, more specific than others. However, if the label is too broad and you are operating in an enclosed space, just know that under Code Section 6000, an enclosed space means that it is a space enclosed entirely or in part with a non-porous covering of sufficient size to permit entry and is used in the commercial or research production of an agricultural plant commodity. And so this includes greenhouses, polyhouses, mushroom houses, hoop houses, and other similar structures. A common misconception in cannabis production is that organic pesticides are automatically approved for use. However, a pesticide's organic status does not determine whether it is legally permitted, right? Even if a pesticide is labeled as organic or that it's approved for use in certified organic agriculture, it still must follow all California's criteria for use. And so the reason why I'm highlighting this is because our office just, we're wrapping up with our audits, cannabis industry audits, right? And I was often asked whether all OMRI listed products are allowed for use in production, in cannabis production, and the short answer is no. And so if you do get an opportunity to review that full approved list, you'll notice that while many products are OMRI listed, not all of them are approved for cannabis. All right, so getting to the approved products, to assist cannabis growers and licensed pesticide applicators in identifying which pesticides meet California criteria for use, DPR developed an approved list. And so as of November 2025, the list includes about 133 approved pesticide products, which includes your fungicides, insecticides, plant growth regulators, even adjuvants are listed there. The list also includes more than 200 products that have been vetted and do not meet the legal criteria. And so all these products included on this list have been scientifically reviewed by the United States Environmental Protection Agency as well as DPR for human health and environmental impacts, and are registered for use on similar crops, but not specifically for cannabis. And so the list is not a recommendation, nor is it a complete list of all possible products that can be used. As a reminder, FIFA 25B products are exempt and are not scientifically reviewed by DPR and will not be included in this list, although they may meet the criteria for use on cannabis. All right, so this is just a small snippet of what the product list looks like, right? I do want to go slightly over this. So in the first column, it will basically tell you the product name or trade name. However, the second column is the most important column to pay attention to. You'll either find a Y for yes, it can be applied on cannabis, or it'll have an N for no, it cannot be applied in cannabis. However, this particular list does give you other information, such as some restrictions, exceptions. It also gives you the EPA registration number, so you can assure that you are using the correct product. It'll give you the active ingredient as well as which type of pesticide it is, right? If any of you think that a particular product should be on the list, any of you may submit a request by email with the product name and EPA registration. DPR will then review the request and respond based on whether the product meets the legal criteria for use. And so once a product is added to the list, it will remain there unless it no longer meets the criteria for legal use on cannabis. It's said that the list will be updated as needed, and so it is important to keep up with this list, right? It may be that you're applying an approved product today, but maybe 6 months later, a year later, that product gets removed from the list. So just important to keep up with this list. I do want to briefly cover the process of product registration. So before a product is registered and approved for use, it does have to go through a series of steps. And so the first one, it goes through the Environmental Protection Agency. EPA must approve it for for use anywhere in the United States. And so what EPA does is that it evaluates every pesticide to ensure that it won't harm human or environmental health. And so the approved products available for sale will be labeled with directions for use, right? So once a product goes past EPA, it falls under the hands of the California Department of Pesticide Regulation. DPR basically does the same thing. It evaluates this product, but now it's based on that label that was provided by EPA. And so DPR can reject a product or approve it with more restrictive conditions than EPA. And then finally, to ensure that the product is safe, DPR places that product on what is called a continuous evaluation. It never goes past this step. This is done to address any new information about the pesticide impacts, even after it's been registered. And so DPR, they monitor pesticide air, they monitor the surface water, groundwater, and if there's new scientific information, that data gets analyzed. If there is a problem that gets identified, DPR can place additional restrictions on a product or even cancel its registration, meaning that it can no longer be applied in California. So here we have FIFA 25B products. I believe my coworker Sarah covered this. And so FIFA 25B products are considered minimum risk pesticides because they pose little to no risk in terms of human health and to the environment. These products include natural and plant-based ingredients such as your essential oils that are derived from peppermint, rosemary, clove, garlic, etc. Right? It's also your food-based ingredients such as corn oil, soybean oil, citric acid, and other low-risk substances like sodium chloride, potassium, and so forth. And so before I do move on, I think it's important to clarify how plant growth regulators fit into the cannabis compliance. Under federal law, specifically the Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, and Rodenticide Act, any substance intended to alter or accelerate plant growth is legally considered a pesticide, right? So this means that PGRs are not treated any differently. They do fall under the same regulatory framework or umbrella as pesticides. In California, the same definition applies. And so bottom line, if it regulates plant growth, it is a pesticide. Just make sure that you are using a plant growth regulator that is approved for use on cannabis, right? Here I have two examples, or an example of two products, plant growth regulators that are approved for use on cannabis. These can be found again on the DPR list of approved pesticides. And as a reminder, if you haven't reviewed the full list, I do encourage you to do so for all those cannabis growers in here. There is actually it seems like there's actually a wide range of pesticides that have been approved for your operations. So now a little bit into the illegal pesticide use. Illegal pesticide use in cannabis refers to any product that is either not permitted to be used or is applied in a way that it is violating the approved label directions. And so even if you're using an approved product, if you're not following that label how it's supposed to, it's considered illegal pesticide use. And so in the cannabis industry, illegal pesticide use is most often associated with unlicensed or unregulated grow operations, whether it's little oversight to no oversight on what chemicals are being applied. And so law enforcement agencies have identified various illegal products throughout the years. These pictures are not specifically from Monterey County. I'm just sharing pictures that have been found in illegal grow sites throughout the state of California. And so as you can see, some of these chemicals carry the signal word danger. Some other chemicals that were found were also restricted materials. Some of these pesticide products were already banned in the United States due to their extreme toxicity. And so you can only imagine the hazards these chemicals pose if cannabis were treated, harvested, and then sold to consumers. And so burning sulfur inside a greenhouse for pest control is illegal in California. DPR has clarified that heating or burning sulfur to control pests in enclosed spaces like a greenhouse or grow rooms is considered a pesticide use that would require EPA registration. And so since no sulfur products are registered for that application, obviously that practice is not permitted in California. Illegal cannabis growers in California have also been found using highly toxic pesticides products that are labeled in Chinese. Because these foreign products are not registered or approved in California, again, these products are illegal to use on cannabis. And so we're getting to the end. When we talk about illegal pesticides, it's important to understand that it does, the risk extend far beyond just regulatory compliance. And so first, there's that risk to consumers. Cannabis is very unique compared to many other crops because it is often inhaled rather than eaten, although to some extent it is edible. This means pesticide residues can directly be introduced to the lungs. Those residues may be unsafe, potentially leading to respiratory issues or other long-term effects. Second, there's that risk to applicators or other employees, and so illegal pesticides often lack clear label instructions, specifically when it comes to the required PPE. Then there's those risks to the environment, right? So some of these pesticides can contaminate the soil and water as well as harm other non-target organisms that can be very beneficial to our ecosystem. Additionally, some of these chemical residues can persist in the environment for very long periods of time, right? So it can actually deteriorate the environment. And then finally, there is that risk to the business. It can result in serious consequences, including fines, enforcement actions, product recalls, and even loss of cultivation license. And as I mentioned earlier, cannabis products that fail pesticide residue testing cannot be sold, which can lead to significant financial losses. And so here's a brief summary. Division 6 and 7 of the Food and Agriculture Code also applies to cannabis, including obtaining that operator identification number. You must report all pesticide use to the county. Make sure that you have all those field worker handler trainings and that they are occurring, and also record keeping those documents. At this time, there are no pesticide products registered specifically for cannabis use. Because of this, it is critical to only use products that meet California's criteria for use. And then finally, illegal pesticide use is defined as using unapproved pesticide products or applying approved pesticides in a manner that violates the label. All right, so this is the end of my presentation. If any of you have any questions, feel free to ask them now. Yes?
Good morning. I do have a question. For our industry, we have that list. And if there is a product that they wish to use that's not being, saying yes or no, being shown on that list, how would you recommend besides, they can contact and say, I'd like to use it, but can they contact your office to say, I would like to use this, it's not showing up as yes or no on that list? Can they call you? How would you like them to proceed?
Yeah, we will definitely, we wouldn't tell you off the bat, yes, you can use it. For what we would do, or at least what I would do, is get the information from you. What product is it? What is the registration number for it? And then I would have to look into it to see if the active ingredient fits the 25B product criteria. And so if it's not on the list, it could be a 25B product. However, the 25B product requires a little bit more review of the label. And so again, if you do have a product that you wish to use, give us a call. We will look into it in terms of the active ingredient, if it meets the exception criteria in terms of residue tolerance and perhaps the registration. We'll definitely be able to back you through that.
Okay, so if it's not on the list, they should not proceed until given a thumbs up by your office. Oh, I don't know, maybe I'm backing you into a corner, my apologies, and you don't have to answer. I'm just asking because sometimes people wish to use a product that's not showing up on that list, and so if they were to call my office, I would not want to coach them, because that's not my specialty.
Yeah, I would just recommend that you give us a call and we'll look into that product.
And then just proceed that way.
Yeah, I think that would be the best bet. You can also contact UPR. I'm not sure, how long it'll take to get back to you, but yeah, definitely give us a call. That's what we're here for.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. All right. So if there's any other questions, feel free to ask them. If other questions come up in the future, just give us a call or shoot us an email. Again, as a reminder, DPR does have a cannabis program. I do encourage you guys all to look at that, skim through it. You might find some useful information. And finally, here is a QR code for the list of approved products. However, we do have this QR code printed in the back along with other resources. Thank you.
That was our last presentation. We would like to thank you guys for attending their 2026 Cannabis CE continuing education session. If you have any questions like how the following inspectors mentioned, we are in the back room of the tables. Any questions that you guys might have right now or later on, you guys can also put you down your information and we can get back to you with that. Our office is a resource for all of you. We encourage you to contact us at any time to learn about the regulations that are going on that are applicable to your operation. If you anticipate an inspection, although some of them are probably coming to an end for us, we do encourage you guys to reach out to us beforehand so we can get you into the right path and get everything that you need on time. So like I mentioned in the beginning of the session, your certificates are going to be located in the back of the table. There will be some staff in case you guys have trouble finding it. And we also ask you to fill out, take a moment and fill out our surveys. This is just a customer satisfaction that the Commissioner's Office provides. Any feedback that you guys might have will definitely help us out to know anything that we might need to do different. It's just a couple little simple questions. But once again, thank you for attending the session and feel free to reach us out anytime. Thank you.